what would sound like a little bit of a down note, but it has a positive upswing. And that is, unfortunately, American Indians and Alaska Natives do continue to historically be undercounted. And in fact, we continue to be the most undercounted of all races. And so in 2020, we did have an undercount of about 5.6%. It wasn't significantly different than our previous undercount in 2010, but the fact that it continues is the issue, right? And so the census has done a couple of things to try and alleviate that or improve that and make that better. And that is, for the first time, they've created permanent tribal relations positions. They've never had these before. These will be folks who will be on the ground in tribal communities, in urban tribal areas, working with American Indians and Alaska Natives and tribal organizations to improve that, because we know data is important. So you had asked the director, well, how does data impact funding? What does that mean? How does that happen? So, a little bit about that. Federal dollars, and it's really a twofold. It's funding, but it's also representation, right? Like, we know tribes are now in the business of power building. We now know that we have a presence, we have a political presence, we have a voice in Indian country. We want to be represented, and we want to, show who we are as diverse tribal nations. So that's one very important aspect of it. The other is, of course, funding. And so when you look at some of our largest tribal programs that come to our tribes, those are things like health, housing, education, transportation. All of those are built around funding methodologies using census data. When we had COVID and Department of Treasury was meeting with tribes to roll out CARES dollars and how they were going to divvy that up amongst tribal nations, they used census data to do that. And so if we don't have good data in place, that dramatically impacts what tribes are going to receive. And so our sole purpose now as these tribal relations specialists is to get us where we need to be. We got to get that data right. We have to, work really closely with tribes and tribal organizations about creating an awareness around why it's important, how that data feeds into their programs, into strategic planning, into, economic development, how they may want to expand, whatever that is, whether it's gaming, it could be anything. Data does that. That's your power tool. And so we want to make sure that that's communicated to tribes and that they are aware of that and that we're here. So right now we have one person that's in the Los Angeles region, which is myself. And we have 7 tribes in the LA region. We have over 7 states, over 390 tribes. And then we have 2 that are located in the Denver region, and we are onboarding 1 in the Chicago region. That's because that's where the bulk of our tribes are. When you look at where tribes are located, that's where they are. But we do have national coverage. So all of us divvy up all of those tribes in the Southeast and the Northeast, so we do provide broad coverage. We haven't forgotten about our East Coast tribes or our Southeast tribes. And we are going to focus around 4 primary areas. That one of those is ongoing surveys. So Dr. Santos talked about the importance of the American Community Survey. The American Community Survey really provides us the meat of data between that 10-year gap of decennial data. So it's really that ongoing, more refreshed data. And so we do have a tool called My Tribal Area. You could just Google that. You could look it up on the census website under the search engine. But that data in My Tribal Area uses American Community Survey. So it's a newer, refresher data than 10-year, decade type data. So that's one of our key focus areas, is to improve ongoing surveys, get increased participation in those. So therefore we have better, more reliable, more robust data. The second thing is our geography programs. And this is especially centered around our boundary and annexation survey. So I think one thing that tribes don't probably realize, or most people don't realize, is that it's really the census as the federal agency that affirms tribal land boundaries every year. It's not the BIA. So while the BIA may grant land into trust and may go through that process of denoting trust land or reservation land, we really affirm the land boundaries every year. And we have a strong working group between our geographers and the BIA geographers to make sure we're on the right track and the right page. And we do, of course, we want to get that information directly from the tribes. So we reach out to the tribes annually to say, this is what we have as your land boundaries. Is that correct? And so it's really important that we get tribal participation in that because we do focus data specifically within those tribal reservation land boundary areas. The third thing is increasing the use of our data products and our data tools. Many tribes are amazed when we go out and do data workshops that all this rich data is available to them for free, right at their fingertips. They just need to learn how to access it, where it's at, how to use it. We have a lot of data that's plug and play into a grant. So you could just pull it directly from our website. It will graph it for you. You can drop it into a grant, boom, you're ready to go. And so we partner very closely with our data dissemination specialists to provide those workshops. And so that's a really valuable resource for our tribal governments. And the third is recruitment, job recruitment. We are constantly recruiting for field survey staff. Right now, we're starting to recruit for our housing surveys. And we know that you're going to get the best results if you hire locally, particularly in reservation areas. So we really want to work closely with tribes on recruitment to increase jobs in their areas and to get folks. Most of these positions, have really competitive pay rates. And so, we want to get that out there, and we know that that's important. So those are some of the things that we're doing around that. That's why data is important. That's how it feeds into funding, and that's how you can use it and really use it to your advantage. That's what we want tribes to do.
Yeah, well, and that's fascinating. I did not realize the census had more to do with the land boundaries in the BIA. I had no idea. That
most people don't, yes.
But that may be one of the best reasons to tell a native why they need to fill out their census form.
Right.
For our land.
Yes.
Yeah. So would that also for the tribes that have been buying back land, does that get rebounded?
Exactly. That's why it's important that we do it annually, because we know, there's this, anywhere you look, you hear the whole land back campaign, right? We're very empowered by that. We want land back, and that's a great thing. And so that's why we go out annually with the survey to say, okay, how have you expanded your land boundaries? How can we make sure that we capture that? We have that noted, and we're capturing the right data in the right areas for tribal reservation lands and off-reservation trust land. So it also includes that off-reservation trust land portion as well. Yeah, so that's really important that you asked about the land back piece. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that actually like that. I've always filled out my census, but if somebody asks, I'll be like, that's how we know where our land is.
Yes,
that's because we're all. I don't know anybody who's against the land back, so that I think that's one of the best ones. And then also for the grant data, because I want to call him representative. I've talked to too many politicians lately. For Director Santos, I think that might be it. I think that might be the reason why, and to get everybody into that part in particular. That is it. Yeah, and also
that's part of it. You have to find what's going to resonate with folks, right? And so, I think a lot of times people think, oh, Census Bureau data, boring, and they don't really think about what does that mean? What does that represent? How does that represent me as an individual American Indian? How does that represent me in terms of my land base and my homelands? How does that represent me in terms of funding for my tribal programs? Even if I go off my land base, I'm going to college. How does that affect my education dollars? You really have to think kind of beyond just, ooh, boring data, to what does that really mean to me as a person, as an individual Chickasaw? What does that really mean to me? And that's another part of it too. Just using my own tribe as an example, we put out maps every year, and then we also update this in our tribal newsletters about where our Chickasaws are not just within the United States, but internationally. I mean, we've got people all over the place, all over the world, and that's awesome. But we want to know where they are. We want to be able to reach them because they're still a part of our tribal community and our tribal family. And so census helps, bridge that too. It's telling you where people are. So that's also a helpful use of data.
Yeah, that's fascinating. My tribe also in the newsletter started doing a little map of where are the Peorians.
Right, right. And it's always interesting to look at that. I'm fascinated by it.
But it also makes it sound like maybe my grandfather was right and that we need to put our tribe first.
So there is one really important kind of education and awareness and outreach tool that we talked about during the decennial, which I think always stays relevant. And I think this is kind of attests to what your grandfather was saying. And that is, we really tried to do a lot of education around when completing your census form and looking at head of household, make sure the American Indian within that household is put first, because that's what captures that home as a native home. And so when you look at housing dollars and when you look at, when you look at data under even HUD, they'll use that census data to say, okay, well, where are these pockets, even within urban communities, of where we have American Indian households? And the only way to do that, the only way for that to be captured as an American Indian household is for that head of household, that person number one, to be the American Indian in the home. So maybe there's something to be said for that. I mean, I definitely think Director Santos is correct that it's about self-identification and self-affiliation. I do want to say, related to your question to him about capturing non-recognized tribes, we do capture data for state recognized tribes. So like, for example, Lumbees, large state recognized tribe. We capture a lot of data for them, even including within Robeson County. So, we know where they are and where their traditional homelands are. So that is data that we do capture as well. So it is important for state recognized tribes, not just federally recognized tribes. And we do have a lot of upcoming, and we've had already some 2020 data releases. So you can already start to take a look at what some of this data looks like. So we have already released, of course, our apportionment data and our redistricting data, which is what the tribes, which is what the states had to be able to do in terms of reapportioning the House of Representatives and creating redistricting lines within their individual states. We've recently released what we call our post-enumeration survey data, and that's really our quality control. That's it's like a small census sample that we do after the formal census to really look at, did we capture what we thought we were capturing? Again, it's quality control measure. It's what gives us our over and under counts. So that's how we know that American Indians and Alaska Natives did have a 5.6% undercount again in 2020. We know that through the PES data, and that data is out there right now. On May 31st, we released our post-census group quarters review. And so that gives governments, including tribal governments, a chance to go back and look at group quarters. So our group quarters could be anything from tribal colleges and universities that have dorms. It could be our tribal hospitals. It could be our tribal nursing homes. All of those are considered group quarters. So they have a chance to look at that data to see, okay, does this look right, and conduct a review of that. So I'd really encourage tribes to be able to take a look at that. And then again, in 2023, which will be our big upcoming release, is our detailed demographic and housing characteristics. And that's where you'll see those breakdowns of tables between who identified as different tribes, blends of tribes, mixes of tribes, and being able to capture that detailed intertribal data as well. So that's what's going to be upcoming in 2023, and we have to look forward to.
That's great. So I have a question that is, well, it's about data. It's always about data. I guess it's a census, but there is a lot of research going on about ancestry, and it has been very hard to find any data about Native American ancestry. It's like my family cuts off a few greats back, and we got moved from Illinois, and then the people that were in Illinois, anyone who stayed is kind of gone, disappeared, like they disappeared. And so it's fascinating. How can people use the census data to help them find their family and their homelands?
So we do so after 72 years, we can publicly release census records. So we just had a huge public release of 1950 census data. And so even Secretary Deb Haaland did a big release about, why this data is important within Indian country. She did a YouTube video, which is great. I would encourage anyone to go and watch it. But you can go back now, that's our most recent release. So you can go back to 1950 census records and look at who may have been in your family. How did they identify those households? What does that look like? Where were they located? So those are great, like you said, for kind of just genealogy, research, ancestry type information. And we get requests about that all the time. So it's fascinating. People are really getting into that these days. And you kind of start to go down that rabbit hole, and it gets really deep.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of my aunts has been very into it lately. And so we've been able to trace the Scottish line of our family somewhere back to 1100s. And then we're stuck at the great, great, great and she's like, well, I think we have to take a trip to Illinois and go through the archives there and find the rest of the family. Because it's once people move, and then people's names got changed.
Right.
Like a lot of people, most of my family went to boarding schools, their names were changed. So it won't match what their parents had put on the roll. So it's fascinating though. It's a puzzle to put together. So.
And you mentioned boarding schools, and we know, there's a lot going on right now around boarding schools. And so, some of those older census records, 1950s and earlier, those can be really at play there, So what I would encourage folks to really use those census records as a tool for any research that they plan to do along those lines. Yes, definitely.
Thank you. So then another question I have, people are going to want to know, you mentioned earlier, I'm going to call him representative every single time, Director Santos, is that you're always hiring for positions. Would that include youth? Could youth sign up to go do surveys for people, or is there an age limit?
Well, that would be awesome if they could. But yes, I think that you do have to be, I'm sure, at least 18 or older, yes, to do surveys. But we would definitely encourage you to think about that, especially if they're college age, looking at doing part-time work, because, a lot of it is part-time work. It certainly isn't full-time in terms of field survey work, but it does give you an opportunity to be out in the community, shaking hands, knocking on doors. And so, it is almost a perfect position for our college age kids and our elders, so I would encourage those two populations specifically to be able to look into and apply for these positions. Absolutely.
Maybe even an elder partner with a youth and go.
Wouldn't that be cool to have like a little mentorship? Yes. Awesome.
I like that. Yeah. So can I ask you a personal question?
Yes.
So how did you get to this point in your life? How did you get this kind of job?
How did I come to this?
What is your story? What did you do? Did you go to college? I want to know so that the youth can know how they can get to places where you are.
So I actually, I started off working in my tribal youth program. I did a lot of we had a summer youth program. And so I certainly spent my summers, working for our tribal summer youth program starting at 16. Obviously did go off, went to college, went to graduate school. When I got out of graduate school in my 20s, I really, thought, what exactly do I want to do? Because I had experience working at a tribal community level. And so I went to work for the state of Oklahoma. And so I got a lot of state experience. And then I realized in working for the state of Oklahoma, a lot of things, I constantly heard, well, this is decided nationally. This is decided at the federal level, particularly as it relates to tribes. So I thought, well, I got to go to the federal level. So then I lived and worked in DC for about 12 years, working on federal policy and American Indian legislation, working in and around the Hill, working for different federal agencies. And And then, you know, I kind of came full circle with that. I had local tribal experience, I had state experience, I had federal government experience. And then I started doing consulting, tribal consulting. And I was in tribal consulting. A lot of what I was really interested in, a component of that was around engagement, community engagement. And so I started doing some campaign organizing and realizing like, okay, well, if we want good decisions for tribes, we need good decision makers. And so it was when I was doing that I got a call that the Census Bureau was starting to hire tribal folks for the decennial, for the 2020 decennial. And I started to learn all the aspects of the census in ways that I had never basically acknowledged or given the Census Bureau credit for before, because I was one of those hard to count people. I didn't complete a census. You know, it was hard to find me. I moved a lot. And the first time I completed a census was when my children were in school. And so it was through the Statistics in School program. And for me at that time, it was really about representation. It was about making sure that that school and that school district knew that they had 2 Chickasaw kids, you know, in Washington, D.C. going to school there, you know, so that's what really nailed it for me. And so when I learned all of these other aspects of what the census does in terms of representation, in terms of reapportionment, in terms of funding and housing and all these kinds of things, I was like, you know, I better see what I can do there. And so in the LA region for the 2020 decennial, I was the tribal partnership program manager, and I was our congressional partnership program manager. And then I oversaw the states of Alaska and Hawaii. And so we really do include our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander cousins as part of our tribal partnership program and working with the Hawaiian homelands, which was such a beautiful blessing to me to be able to, you know, engage there and do some work there. And of course, we always kick off our census count in January in Alaska in a village. And so, you know, that was just an unforgettable experience as well. So the census has blessed me. I feel like I owe them a lot, and I really want to give back to our tribal communities in terms of that and making sure that they reap the benefits as well.
Yeah, well, it sounds like if some of our youth who are in college or getting ready to go to college did the part-time work doing counts at the census, that would really give them a foot in the door to getting to places if they wanted to get into politics or get into governance on any level, whether it be in their tribes or states or federal. That would be a great stepping stone for them as well.
I agree. I think it would be a great stepping stone.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that about yourself.
Yes, of course. And then I'll just, unless you have any more questions, I'll quickly end on saying that it was great to see Daybreak star at the Reservation Economic Summit. I heard that it was the largest registration that they have ever had in terms of you know, conference registration. So I think that we're just continuing to grow and be out there. So it was good to see you there. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be at the National Congress of American Indians mid-year conference in Anchorage, Alaska. And we will have a census workshop panel on Wednesday, June 15th. So if there are any listeners that happen to be up in Anchorage for NCAI mid-year, I would encourage them to come to our panel presentation on June 15th.
That was wonderful. And then what is that website that you mentioned earlier specifically for tribal groups?
It is called My Tribal Area. And it's broken down by, you can either search by state or you can plug in your specific tribal name and pull up data, American Community Survey data. Remember, that's just a sample survey. It's not a full count like the decennial censuses, but it does provide a good basis for overall data for tribes.
Perfect. So My Tribal Area.
My Tribal Area. Great tool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, for all your time today and bringing in Director Santos. What a treat. It's so nice to see people with that much heart in the upper reaches of government. It's very nice. Gives us hope.
Yes, absolutely. It was great to see your face again.
Yes.
Staying connected.
Exactly. And if you need anything else out, or if you're doing another survey or let us know, and we can do another interview, and we can put the word out ourselves as well.
Awesome. Happy to hear that. Thank you so much, Sherry.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for being on the Daybreak Star Radio Network, and until next time.